Now I would like to invite Mr. John Coughlan, Chairman of the International Cerebral Palsy Society, a multinational individual he was born in Wales from a Scottish mother, an Irish father, and a wife from Portugal. Now he lives in Luxembourg and he is involved in many activities which contribute to the world's effort for the improvement of the life of children with cerebral palsy.
I am by the position of chair of the International Cerebral Palsy Society, which is an association with members from around the world. We have our executive committee meeting and general assembly here in Athens during these days at the same time as your conference. I'm here with some colleagues from Switzerland, from Lebanon, from Turkey, from France, from Portugal, from the UK. Just so you know that these international people that are joining you in this conference, sort of where they're coming from. But I have no professional qualifications to be talking about disability. I have no certificate to show. My certificate comes in the form of my son, David, who's 11 years old now. He has cerebral palsy. And one of the wonderful things about ICPS, International Cerebral Palsy Society, is that the objective is really to bring together parents and professionals to be able to talk. And I feel very lucky to be a part of an organization where I can have a discussion with a pediatrician, with a physiotherapist, not about a very specific individual issues to do, but generally about the big challenges facing children with specifically cerebral palsy. And I would like to ask, before we start, just to understand about your background, how many of you have a child or have had a child with disability? Wait for the interpretation, perhaps. Thank you. And how many of you work with children with disability? Awesome. Good. Okay. So I'm going to try to raise some general issues, but I'm going to obviously speak very much from personal experience, because that is the only evidence that I can share with you on a level where I can be sure about what I'm talking about. So, in the field of cerebral palsy, you have... Yeah. In the field of cerebral palsy, we have something called the Gross Motor Function Classification System, which helps us to categorize children's ability in terms of motor skills, and we can see what sort of path that they're on in life. So my son is in level 4. It gives you an idea of the kind of challenges that we are facing. He uses a wheelchair. And a lot of what I will say refers specifically to disability in terms of cerebral palsy, but a lot of it also is about disability more general. I just want you to understand the context and to also understand that some of the things I say you might not agree with, because I'm speaking very much from this personal experience. So let's look first of all at the starting point for all of our discussions during this symposium, which is the vulnerable child. The term vulnerable in English has its roots in the Latin word vulnus, for wound. I had a discussion with Daphne and Teresa, who will be speaking later on, about the origins of the word in Greek as well. There is a similarity, but not quite the same. It could be interesting to actually look at what all that means. But basically, in the English sense, and going back to the Latin origin, it's about being easy to wound. But with disability, in fact, disability is essentially the result of a wound, whether it be something that happened at birth, in the case of my son, before birth, or even later in life. It's the result of a wound. So the question about are disabled children automatically vulnerable children is an interesting one to pose. And in fact, the subtitle of this session, the quotation by Carl Gustav Jung, even a happy life cannot be without a measure of darkness, seems to refer to disability as the darkness, but I wonder whether that's something that we should be internalizing. What about thinking about the happy child with disability? What about thinking about what happiness actually means, first of all? Happiness is a relative term, I think we can all say. It's something to do with the context in which we live. Happiness is about satisfaction, so we can be dissatisfied or more satisfied. Happiness is about what we want to achieve and the extent to which we can achieve it. So I think it's important to refer to what I would call our baseline for happiness. What's the starting point from which we become happy or less happy? Is a child with disability unhappy about being disabled? Or happy when they are enabled to overcome what they are, what is their disability? And I will refer now to my own son here and look at what he started doing recently, which I say he uses a wheelchair. But there are various kinds of walking frames around, but we found one which is really excellent, which removes all sorts of barriers from in front of him. Whereas most walking frames, if you know this, have big things in front of you which are there for stability, of course, but actually impede your interaction with the world around you. A few pictures of him. I think you can see he's quite happy. And indeed, there's a picture of him on his school trip, playing football in goal with his teammates in his walking frame. That really gave him a sense of ability to participate with able-bodied children. So he was happy. He was happy with his disability. But there is, of course, the darkness. And I want to talk about 5 areas, 5 points to think about where disability is a particular source of vulnerability in children. And I've listed them sort of in terms of the extent to which the child themselves is conscious of that disability or that risk. So starting from the first one, a difficult one is alienation from children, pain and health issues, poverty, education, and abuse. Let's start with alienation. Children, they're lovely, aren't they? They're innocent, they're playful, but they can be immature. They don't understand things so well. They can be impatient. They want to run out and they want to go and play. They don't want to wait for somebody who takes a long time to catch up with them. They can be very self-centered. They can be the center of the universe. They are the center of the universe. Understanding and being able to take account of the needs of others can be a challenge to them. And they can be insensitive. They can be, sometimes we think it's a wonderful thing how children come out with the phrase that says, is in all honesty, what's going on, but that can sometimes be hard. So I think that's something which we have to be conscious of. It's not something that we can do much about. Children are children, but it does affect the lives of children with disabilities. With regard to pain, pain and ill health, this is where I'm really off territory in terms of, there are plenty of professionals who will be able to speak about these issues more, but there are specific issues with disability that it's important to have in mind, which go beyond the disability themselves. Pain itself is a poorly understood issue, I understand, in terms of disability. In terms of a child with cerebral palsy who has a lot of spasticity, a lot of muscle tension, that can cause pain in itself. Is that the disability, or is the pain something that should be treated separately from that? These are issues that are very challenging for a child. And coming back to that concept of a baseline of happiness, you also might have a baseline of pain. If a child is used to being in pain, sometimes they don't report it, sometimes they don't explain it in a way that actually helps to deal with it. And then with this susceptibility to be ill, there are 2 big areas which just make it very difficult for a child in a wheelchair to develop normally, and therefore makes them more likely to be ill. One is nutrition. That can be children with more severe disabilities than my son who can't swallow properly, but it's simply the ability to feed themselves, the ability to go to the fridge and take something out when they want to eat. And they get used to it, of course. Yeah? So they don't necessarily look after themselves properly. And exercise, of course, is a big issue. The ability to actually develop properly in terms of getting out there, moving your muscles in the proper way, whatever it is, they're missing out on that as well. So these are contributing factors to a situation in which they're more likely to be ill or more likely to develop problems, general health problems in future. With regard to poverty, I put inadequate welfare there as well, because it's not just about poverty itself. It's about the fact that disability is expensive. It's expensive to be able to provide sort of mobility aids that children need. It's expensive to provide the communication aids that children need. It's expensive to provide the care and attention that these children need. And in a context in which a lot of, and in this country in particular, I think we all know about austerity. It's not something that has just affected Greece, it has affected a lot of countries. And there was an interesting, very good study produced by the European Academy of Childhood Disability just in the course of being published this year, which really underlines that in the last years there has been a significant decline in the quality of services for children with disability and in how well health, education and social care needs have been met. And that's across Europe. With regard to education, there has been a big trend across many countries to promote inclusive education, to encourage children to be included in the mainstream education system. That's the option we've chosen to now for my son, who's in a mainstream school. But we see problems with it as well. When you go away from institutions, special schools, which concentrated the expertise in dealing with particular issues, to inclusion in the mainstream system, you are faced with a challenge of the expertise in the mainstream system. The teachers, the assistants, how well qualified are they to deal with the specific issues of that disabled child? I think personally that inclusion is the right way, but I think there's a big challenge to make it actually work, and we have a long way to go. Do we have the resources to do it? What about the qualifications at the end of the process as well? This is where it comes into life chances. A child, there was a quote yesterday from, I can't remember her name, the professor talking about the Turkish minority in Greece, and the dropout rate of children in the Turkish minority. I think she said that the dropout rate across Greece was 7%, and in the Turkish minority was 65%. Huge difference. But you have another issue there with children with disabilities in the mainstream system. To what extent are they able to fulfill the qualifications that the mainstream system offers? What kind of obstacles do they face along the way that actually impedes them from getting those qualifications to be able to leave the school system properly set up for adult life? So this issue is moving from the vulnerable child to the vulnerable adult, the extent to which our whole education and social system prepares children for adult life and maybe leaves them vulnerable at the end of that process. And finally, the area of abuse. I thought I would just put that quote up on the side by itself because it's so shocking. Children with disabilities are 4 times more likely to suffer violence than non-disabled children. That's from a report by the World Health Organization, published in The Lancet, top scientific journal. So I hope that the numbers behind that are accurate, because it is really quite shocking. And I found a list of the government of South Australia provides a list of the factors to take into account in terms of how is it that children with disabilities are so at risk of abuse. It's quite interesting to go through them. that they lack understanding of relationships and what abuse is. Again, our baseline concept, if they're used to a certain situation, maybe they don't actually recognize that they are being abused. The fact that obviously a child with physical disability will find it more difficult to resist abuse. A lot of children with disability have difficulties with communication. They might be non-verbal, quite simply. They cannot say what's happening to them. If a child is difficult, it has behavioral issues, it will be manhandled a lot more frequently. And when does that manhandling go from necessary control to abuse? Children with disabilities are dependent by definition, and that's important in this point to understand that they have primary carers, their parents, their care assistants and so forth, who know what they're doing. But if they are always dependent, perhaps those people are not there at a particular time, and they're in the hands of somebody else, and that person doesn't know what they're doing, and that can lead to abuse, or that situation can be abused, taken advantage of. The next 2 points lead, I'm not going to read it out, but what it gets into is something very sensitive, which is authority. That a child that is dependent and disabled will be told what to do, and will get used to being told what to do, and will potentially start thinking that whatever the adult tells them to do is the right thing to do. And then there's a question of trust. A child that is vulnerable through their disability will inevitably trust those people around them. That can be because they don't feel themselves able to do things. It talks here about low self-esteem and a low perception of their own abilities. So they really want somebody to help them. They trust them. And then a final point is obviously that if you want to understand abuse, if you want to intervene with abuse, you have to be able to reach where that abuse is happening. And unfortunately, a lot of families with children with disabilities are isolated. They're not as integrated in society for a lot of the reasons that we've just discussed. Now, I'm going to go back to another personal example here, very personal. In another part of my life, my family and I are very much engaged in the Roman Catholic Church. And you will know that the Roman Catholic Church has gone through a period of huge scandals related to abuse. That's where I come back to these issues. Just to show, my son loves the church. He's an altar server. He's leading a procession through Luxembourg with his altar server teammates. He loves the church probably because it's an environment in which he can do lots of things, and he's simply included. It's not like school where you're tested and where you have to actually keep up with the others. He can just do what he wants to do, and he's happy there. But the scandal of abuse in the Catholic Church really helped me to understand the extent to which abuse is not about, or what it is about the abuse of authority and trust. So coming back to those risk factors, it's about children actually feeling to be in a comfortable place, and an adult taking advantage of that situation. And we have to be, I think, if you're in a care environment, you have to be very, very, very conscious of that risk. We had Panagiotis Ophios yesterday talking about SOS Children's Villages, wonderful projects. But I'm a sponsor of one village in Sierra Leone, something I do for a number of years. And a couple of years ago, we got a letter from them saying that they were sorry to inform us that there had been a case of abuse that had passed over to the Public Prosecution Service and so forth. They wanted to be transparent about it. But even in an environment as exemplary as the SOS Children's Villages, abuse was happening. And it can happen anywhere. And we have to be conscious, and we have to put in place all of those measures for safeguarding to prevent it happening. So what can we do, finally? We've talked about alienation from other children. I give that 2 stars. We can do something. We can encourage children to be more open and inclusive of children with disabilities, but our capacities are limited. With pain, nutrition and exercise, I think that's an area where we can do more. We can pay more attention. We can enable more. With regard to poverty and welfare, I think, unfortunately, this is something which, as a society, we can do something more about, but individually it's more challenging. In terms of education, educationalists, it really comes down to individuals, and that's where I think I would say that you can do more. You can, in your educational environment, make sure that the relevant expertise is available to children to help them to develop properly. And in terms of abuse, that's really the area where we really can do something, and if individuals don't do something about it, then we can't complain that it still happens. So thank you for your attention. I wanted to leave you with a picture of the happy child with disability.